Hello guys, and welcome to my Mona Xiangling Vaporize team guide. Here is a quick example of this team's potential before I jump into the details. As you just saw, the difference between a 4-star weapons on the DPS to the 5-star weapon team using the R5 Freed and Sworn on the Kazuha are quite close. The time difference is only a matter of 12 seconds. Quite a surprise for a 4-star weapons team. Alright, let's get to it. What I'll be covering in today's video: a summary of the team and how to use it, the pros and cons of this team, how does it compare to the Childe Vaporize team, Sucrose instead of Kazuha, will this work? Weapon recommendations, artifact recommendations, Constellations, how will this expand the team's capability, and the Kazuha and Bennett's problem. Unfortunately, I couldn't make this video a quick guide as I needed to be clear on some of the team's perks and limitations. Anyways, let's dive into it. Long ago, the Mona Vaporize team was an ancient team that dates back to the early versions of 1.0. This team was considered a trendy team at the time, where Mona was the only character that could achieve the highest 6 to 7 figure numbers with her elemental burst. Now as time passes, Mona Vaporize teams began to phase out, with newer and faster teams that could outperform Mona, thus making Mona today optimal only to freeze teams as a buffer support. So you may heard of 1010 as the Xiangling salesman. Well, I'm here today as the Mona salesman. In today's video, we will go through the Mona Vaporize team and how it's still viable up until today, and where you yourself can take part in the Mona mains Vaporize tradition. This team doesn't require constellations on your 5-star units, however, your 4-star units may need their constellations to perform up to the standard. You can pretty much clear any content with this team with enough investment. It's basically a team that supports one another, as there is a strong synergy between all 4 party members. Check out some of these examples of non-whale invested teams using the Mona Xiangling Vaporize team. As you can see here, with a proper rotation, you can deal a great amount of damage through this team. There are 3 ways you can follow. You can either choose to do the charge attack vaporize method, where you want to set up a pyro dominant field for Mona to vape her charge attacks and her elemental skills. 2. Reverse vapes, where if you don't want to solely depend on Mona's charge attacks in doing the damage, you can focus on Xiangling to do the damage for you with her Pyronado, making Mona the Hydra applicator in the team. 3. The Unga Bunga method, where it's very casual, it's either Mona or Xiangling that are vaporizing, but this means that Mona and Xiangling needs to be equally invested. I did testing in the Spiral Abyss using 4-star weapons. The results of a clear times were pretty decent. I wouldn't say they are super amazing, but it's definitely a practical team that can perform extremely well without needing to vaporize Mona's burst. This doesn't necessarily mean you want to ignore Mona's burst damage. This just means that you don't need to stress over if you fail to vaporize Mona's burst. The challenge with Mona Vaporize teams today is that Mona's burst is just too technical, and the amount of damage it provides is almost very little value compared with other units today. But if you're a Mona main, you can still use the Mona Vaporize team, and she still does really well. Now I'll get into the pros and cons. Let's start with the pros. Good crowd control. Mainly Kazuha due to his ability to swirl nearby targets in a desired area of casting his elemental skill. All units deal circular AoE damage. Powerful in both single target and multi-target scenarios. Possibility of controlled vapes through either using reverse vaporize with Xiangling or normal vaporize with Mona's elemental skill, charge attacks, and elemental burst. The cons: it uses Kazuha and Bennett, takes away Mona from the freeze team, takes away Xiangling from most meta teams. It may be slightly more expensive to invest than a Childe Vaporize team as well. So now that you know that, how does this compare to the Childe Vaporize team? The Childe Vaporize team works uniquely different, where they operate through vaporizing forward or reverse. In terms of speedruns, a Childe Vaporize team will probably outperform a Mona Vaporize team. In terms of continuous runs, it's probably the same case. However, the Childe Vaporize teams, you do need to follow a strict rotation. Otherwise, if you're not following that strict rotation, you can find yourself locked out of Childe's elemental skill for a long time, or you're going to be missing some of his Vaporize hits. Whereas a Mona Vaporize team, you can somewhat control how much Hydro application you are applying onto enemies, though the Hydro element itself has this mech where if you swirl multiple targets, it itself can indefinitely keep swirling Hydro, and thus making it difficult to remove off multiple enemies. But you can neutralize the Hydro swirl pretty quickly by overpowering it with multiple Hydro applications from Goba, Pyronado, and Kazuha's Burst. This can also set the playing field for Mona to perform Vaporize hits with her charge attacks and elemental skill. Ideally, it's probably better if Xiangling is triggering the Vaporize, simply because you don't have to hold back on your Mona's normal attacks, elemental skills, in order to cause Vaporize reaction hits. Which is why I went Unga Bunga with this team in Abyss, mainly because I wanted Xiangling triggering the Vaporize, while also landing extra Hydro damage hits onto enemies. There is the likely possibility when following this exact rotation that Mona's elemental skill on its 5th hit will most likely proc Vaporize. Simply because Kazuha is near the end of the rotation, performing a pyro-infused swirl. Childe has a known mechanic called quadruple scaling with his Riptide damage. This is a very powerful aspect of Childe, which sadly Mona does not have, so her damage output is going to be significantly less. But again, you can easily control vapes with Mona, whether you would like Mona to be vaping or Xiangling. If you're planning to go Unga Bunga, you are more welcome with this team, just as long as the rotation is consistent and you are using your elemental skills off cooldown to keep the consistent flow of energy particles for the team. Most likely going Unga Bunga will result in Xiangling vaporizing the hits and Mona becoming the Hydro applicator. So the question whether Sucrose instead of Kazuha, whether this is viable. So I gave my team all 4-star weapons for each member. The team just performs borderline clears in the current Abyss. That means it can clear about 1 minute and 30 seconds in Abyss Floor 12. But a good run would be about 30 to 40 seconds, while a bad run can be about 1 minute to 30 seconds. It's a bit difficult for Sucrose in the team, I would say, even though she provides Viridescent Shred and Elemental Mastery buff to the team, but you're not always going to be vaporizing all your hits due to internal cooldowns. This means that you want the elemental damage bonus amplification instead from Kazuha, as this works a lot better in amplifying both the non-reaction and reaction damage. Still doable with Sucrose. I was managed able to get some decent clears using 4-star weapons for all party members. For 12 to 1 it was 40 seconds, 12 to 2 is 14 seconds, that's if you have everyone's elemental burst ready, because you can pretty much do the Vaporize stagger resistant combo here. If not ready, expect a minute or two. 12 to 3-1, this is probably the most highly saturated HP bosses in the current Spiral Abyss. I only really gave it one shot. It was pretty much around the 1 minute range. Not ideal, can get a bit messy with the Rift Hounds I must say, but still doable. So Sucrose overall within the team, for her to be much value, you would probably need to perform the proper perfect Vaporize combo rather than going Unga Bunga on enemies, unfortunately. My verdict is that Sucrose is semi-clunky in this team, but still doable. Perhaps maybe I'm just not very good at using Sucrose. Alright, with the weapon choices, the interesting thing about this team is that it already performs very well with 4-star weapons, similar to the free-to-play Childe Vaporize team, where that team itself already excels and it's just a matter of replacing Childe, but with Mona. But because we are focusing on the consistency and not how fast or how much damage we are doing over a brief period of time, the weapon options I would recommend are going to be energy recharge dominant. That would mean that a lot of the 4-star weapons are going to be a great choice for this team. Though if you do have 5-star weapons, those options would be highly recommended. There is the rare exception of Xiangling and the Engulfing Lightning. She gains more value of this weapon's buff if you're using the energy recharge build with the Emblem of Severed Fates set. If you're not using this artifact set, you may want to consider other alternative weapon options that can provide a greater output of damage and consistency for Xiangling's burst uptime. Because Mona doesn't necessarily need that much energy recharge, if you're using energy recharge sands, you can give her the Solar Pearl or the Lost Prayer to increase her overall damage. If you have an attack sands, then then you may want to consider the Favonius Codex. Bennett, I recommend running energy recharge swords, just because he's not on the field that much, so you want him to be recharging off field at a very fast rate, as the team is quite dependent on Bennett's burst. Kazuha, it's pretty straightforward. You're going to use Elemental Mastery swords. If you don't have those, you can still use energy recharge swords as an alternative. For artifacts, the Emblem of Severed Fate set would be ideal for both Mona and Xiangling. Mona can also use 2-piece sets. I also use them. Ideally better if Xiangling has it due to her energy hungry demand on her burst. The set itself will assist her with a faster regain and increase her Pyronator effectiveness. I use the 2 Hydro and the 2 Wanderers for Mona, mainly because the rotation I follow is pretty consistent, where the 5th hit of the elemental skill, which is the highest multiplier, will proc Vaporize, which can do about 100k worth of damage. But you can also use the Emblem of Severed Fate on Mona to draw out more damage from her elemental burst and increase her recharge gain. But I mainly use the 2 Hydro and the 2 Wanderers build, as it covers all-round the damage increase to all of Mona's skills. I would assume most players don't have a proper second Emblem of Severed Fate set. Even I don't have one. So that's why Xiangling should have it more than Mona, and Mona can just use 2-piece sets, as that still works very well. Kazuha will use the Viridescent set. I personally tweaked his energy recharge by using certain pieces that slightly emphasizes more on his energy recharge gain. Bennett, just run him with HP and energy recharge, as his main purpose is setting the playing field by spamming his burst. You can also run DPS Bennett. I usually run Bennett with 240 plus energy recharge, just because I want to make sure the flow of things is relatively secure. With a Pyro DPS Xiangling, you could build 180 to 200 energy recharge, and that would be sufficient, where it could require only 1 E and 1 Q, but I do run around 240 plus, so I've kind of tweaked it to my own personal preference. Personally, I like to overkill Bennett with a high amount of energy recharge, just because his main purpose is to apply a buff and allow the burst rotation to begin. Because I've specifically tweaked my team's energy recharge to match all along with each other, I usually use Bennett's burst as an indicator to know that I'm ready to perform my next rotation. In terms of the Constellations, we all know about C6 Bennett. That's entirely up to you if you want to activate it. This is actually a great constellation for Xiangling, though it does restrict flexibility for other teams, unfortunately. Mona C2, a higher chance of vaporizing her hits, and a better hydro application for reverse vapes. C3 Mona, a greater output on her burst damage overall. This is pretty much the stopping point for Mona's burst damage increases. Mona's C4, this is probably the most broken constellation for this team, where it provides an additional crit rate to any party members, including herself, that are hitting the Omen. So that means if you use Mona's burst as the Omen amplifier and a crit amplifier for the reverse vape Xiangling method, your Xiangling is going to be an absolute monster in this rotation. Kazuha C1 pretty much helps with particle regen, which provides consistency for the team. C2 provides a damage boost overall to vaporize hits. His other constellations don't necessarily provide much value for the team, but if you want your Kazuha to do more damage overall and also contribute to the team, you can choose to get those constellations. The Kazuha and Bennett problem. There is the problem that we face now is that every team wants Kazuha or Bennett. A lot of teams like Raiden, Ganyu, Childe Vape, Yoimiya teams somewhat prefer Kazuha and Bennett in their team. Though taking Kazuha and Bennett and Xiangling away from other teams, this still hopefully leaves you with a second team. Teams like the Eula, Hu-Tao teams don't necessarily need to use Kazuha or Bennett to perform really well. You could use the Hu-Tao, Xingqiu, Sucrose, Zhongli type of team. You can use the Ganyu type of freeze team. You can use the Yoimiya overload team, Sucrose taser team, Eula superconduct team, and Geo teams. The only teams that are affected are the Raiden National and the Childe Vaporize teams. So if you plan to run Mona Vaporize teams, since the teams work better with Xiangling or Kazuha in it, you are going to have to make that decision as a Mona main. As well as that, my Xiangling uses Raiden's gear, so this basically takes away the ability for my Raiden to perform at her best. All I can say is that there is plenty of other alternative second team choices for Abyss when you're using the Mona Vaporize team. So don't necessarily feel like this team is being greedy using the best buffers in the game, because there are a lot of other teams that you don't need them and they can still perform very well. Anyways, that's all I have to mention about the Mona Xiangling Vaporize team. It's a very flexible team that can operate in many ways, such as the 3 different play styles, the charge attack vape style, the reverse vape style, and the balanced vape style, known as the Unga Bungas kind of style. I tried to cover as much as I could about this team. If I've left anything out, feel free to ask your questions in the comments section and I'll do my best to answer them. I'd recommend checking out my Mona build guide video and the gameplays of the other Mona mains that have shown a good example of what Mona can do that's not super whaled. If you want a proper look at those teams, I would highly suggest to check those YouTube channels out. Hydrosam as well will also do a review on this team later in the future, so stay tuned for that. Hope you enjoyed this video. I'm also considering on developing some quick guides for Mona, whether that be builds or mechanics related. If you have any suggestions, also let me know in the comments. I try in my best ability to keep Mona Vaporize tradition alive. Be sure to share this video with your friends and family to let them know how great Mona can perform outside of a freeze team and having her own team where she can be the bigger highlight. Thanks for watching.